So, My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 318 has officially released in Shonen Jump, and let me just say this, from what we see with the official translations for this chapter, there could be potential for a particular character to be related to another particular character in the series. Ooh, who could I be foreshadowing? We're just gonna have to watch this video to find out, and we're about to get right into it, right after this intro. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy Manga Man Drew coming at you with a new discussion video about My Hero Academia Manga Chapter 318 titled, now that I think about it, I don't know the title of this chapter. Oh, it's called Reckless. Yeah, you know what? That makes a whole lot of sense. If we're talking about Deku in this chapter, and we're going to be talking about Deku in this chapter, yeah, Reckless is probably the best way to define Deku, not just as a character, but as a person. In this video, I'm actually going to go over a little bit of the differences in translations from the unofficial and official translations for this chapter, as well as going over a particular piece of possible foreshadowing that the chapters could be alluding to with the involvement of a returning character. But before we get more into the discussion, I'd like to ask you, if you haven't done so, to subscribe to my YouTube channel if you like My Hero Academia like content. I do reviews, I do spoiler discussions, as well as I cover the spoilers for My Hero Academia whenever they come out. So if that's something that you're interested in, you should probably subscribe to my YouTube channel. And with that out the way, let's get right into the discussion. So, when it comes to the differences between the unofficial and official translations, there isn't that many differences when it comes to how certain things are interpreted. So yeah, for starters, when it comes to the differences between the official and unofficial translations, there are not that many differences that I can see. One major difference that I can say between the unofficial and official translations is how the chapter is translated, because in the unofficial translation, it is literally translated as dark cloud, which comes from the actual Japanese word that they use to title this chapter, which actually means reckless. So in the unofficial translations, they use it more as a literal term, where in the Shonen Jump official translations, they use it as what it is supposed to mean, which is reckless. So everything that happens from the beginning of the chapter up until we meet the second user of One For All talking, it's pretty much the same between the official and unofficial translations. They both talk about how Endeavor tells Deku that new heroes from across the world are coming to Japan. They both show that Deku is still not healing, and that the previous users are telling Deku that he's moving too fast. We also get a very similar conversation between Nana Shimura, Daigoro Banjo, the fourth user, and how what they say about Deku is pretty much the same between the official and unofficial translations. And even when it comes to what the second user says about how Deku is doing the right thing, he's following the right path, all of that is pretty much the same between the fan translations and the official translations. But the major difference comes when we see what he is saying when he's viewing the first and the third user, because in the unofficial translation, he brings up that Deku carries the will of One For All, but that there is something that we could do to protect Izuku Midoriya. But in the official translation, he brings up the idea that what Deku is doing makes sense because he bears One For All, but if there's anything that could bolster Izuku Midoriya now, it would be ... And later on in the chapter, most likely what that ... means refers to the reemergence or reemergence of a particular character. So this is very important because this is very different. These two lines and what they are trying to convey are very different. In the unofficial translation, it conveys that the vestiges inside of One For All are trying to help Deku, but in the official translation, it seems as if there's going to be some form of outside source that is going to help save Deku, and that is something that seems to be more accurate with what we learn later on in this chapter that I'll get to once we get to that part. And another difference in this chapter when it comes to the official and unofficial translation comes more from the scene where Deku is saving a group of individuals. The context of the scene is the same with how it's translated between the official and unofficial translations. But the one thing that I want to tackle is how the people say sort of kind of thank you to Deku when they're leaving, because in the unofficial, they're basically saying, "Oh, thank God, I'm okay, we're all okay, so." But in the official translations, they say, "Great, glad to hear it, we're fine really, we're just dandy." And I think that when it comes between the official and unofficial translation, when it comes to the scene, I believe that the official translation does it a little bit better, because this scene is trying to convey that the people, even though they know Deku is trying to save them, are still afraid of him. And that fear seems to be more apparent in the official translations than in the unofficial translations, at least in my opinion. And now we get to probably another major difference, sort of kind of, when it comes to the differences between the unofficial and official translation, and that comes with how a specific quirk is translated, because everything up until this point is pretty much the same between the unofficial and official. The reason why Deku wants to stop Shigaraki and stop All For One is all the same, pretty much because he wants to go back and be with his friends. What Dictator talks about with Deku is pretty much the same, about how All For One basically predicted, or All For One told Dictator the type of person that Deku is, or exactly what Deku would do. That was pretty much accurate between both translations. And the difference between the unofficial and the official translation is that Dictator's quirk in the unofficial translation is Dictator, but his official quirk in the official translations for My Hero Academia is called Despot. And the actual difference is just word choice, is just diction, because they both pretty much mean the same thing. They are sort of synonyms for one another, and I think I prefer Despot because it's less confusing than having someone whose name Dictator have the quirk Dictator. So that just makes sense. And there's also a slight difference when it comes to how Deku is trying to come up with a plan to save the people that are being controlled by Dictator. Because in the unofficial translations, Deku believes that he cannot use Air Force because he's missing his gloves, and that Black Whip is out of the question. But in the official translation, he doesn't say that Black Whip isn't outside of the equation, meaning that he could theoretically have used Black Whip to try and save the people, but unfortunately he got caught at the time, so he was unable to act in it. And I think that I kind of prefer the fact that Black Whip is something that he could have used to help the people because it wouldn't have harmed him, or that he has full control over it, that it couldn't harm the people, instead of just ruling it out altogether. And now we get to the final and the major difference between the official and unofficial translations of this chapter. And it doesn't come down to the reveal that Bakugo is back, nor is it reintroduction of his move AP Shot, or Armor Piercing Shot. That is not where the major difference comes in. The major difference comes in with the reiteration of what the second user said, which in the unofficial translation is that if there is something that we could do to protect Izuku Midoriya, but in the official translation, it is translated as, if there's anything that could bolster Izuku Midoriya now, it would be. And I think that when it comes to this idea, and what I want to talk about a little bit more in this video, is the idea and the theory going around the My Hero Academia community. And that theory is that the second user is somehow related to Bakugo, or is Bakugo from the present going back to the past. And the reason why I bring that up is because in the official translation, it gives a little bit more credence to the idea than the unofficial translation. Because the unofficial translation is basically saying that they're going to be the ones to help Deku, but in reality, it's going to be Bakugo to help him. But in the official translations, they basically say and allude to the idea that someone outside of them is going to help Deku, and then we get the reveal that the person that is most likely going to help Deku is going to be Bakugo, or more specifically, the students of Class 2A. And so from here is where I kind of give my thoughts about the theory and what I think about it, and do I think that it is a possibility? No. Mainly because if that is a possibility, it kind of messes with the timeline of My Hero Academia, but also messes with the character of Bakugo. Because from what we're seeing in this chapter, Bakugo and most likely the other students of Class 2A are going to be playing a role in trying to help Deku stop All for One. But this would actually go against what we learned about the second user when we saw him talking with the first user and Deku and showing his unapproval for him. Because if Bakugo and this second user are the same person and Bakugo goes back in time, it would seem to be a really grave character shift in Bakugo to go from, in this chapter, being someone supporting Deku to going back in time and being someone that is against Deku and doesn't believe that he should really be able to use the quirk of One for All. That is too much of a characterization of a character for Bakugo to go through if he were to go back in time. Also, a flaw that I have with the theory is that if Bakugo is going back in time, that means that we will not be able to see more of him growing up and achieving his goal of being the #1 hero, which I believe would be a missed opportunity in the story to show how much Bakugo has actually grown from the beginning of the story to the end. So overall, I think the idea and the theory that the second user is Bakugo is very flawed and doesn't mesh well with what we know about how quirks work in the My Hero Academia universe, because if he goes back in time, most likely there's no way for him to come back, and that if he is a part of One for All, that means that he died in the past, and that would completely go against like what we know now, because it would mean that they could possibly have records of him now, even though it was a long time ago. They would most likely still have records potentially of someone who has an explosion like quirk. Also, we know for a fact that the reasoning why Bakugo has the ability to use explosion is because it's a combination of his mother and his father's quirk. So if this person is actually Bakugo, then there is no way for Bakugo in the past to be able to be the Bakugo in the present because of how his quirk is manifested. So basically, it just doesn't make sense for them to be the same character. But it would make sense for them to be parallels of each other, and how the second user could be a parallel to Bakugo and not an exact copy. And if we follow that level of him being a parallel, most likely what's going to be happening in the next chapter is that in the same way that the second user extended a hand to the first user of One for All, Bakugo, who looks very much like the second user, is also going to be the one to extend a helping hand to the last user of One for All, showing the direct parallels not just to the second user and Bakugo, but also showing a parallel to Deku and Bakugo, and how Deku was also someone that extended a hand to help Bakugo, showing his characterization going full circle. So yeah, that's something that I really want to talk about in this chapter, but that's not the only thing that I want to talk about in this chapter, because I also want to talk about possible predictions for what Class 2A is going to be doing in the future, or specifically next chapter when they meet Deku again. And probably the one thing that I really would like to see is Ochako having a conversation with Deku, but before it gets any sappy or before it gets any shippy, I just want Uraraka to just slap. Now, I know that may seem cruel, but there is a precedent for it, because we've seen that she is willing to slap Deku before. Roll the clip. That always makes me laugh. But I really like this scene in the anime, and I think it would be really cool to see something like this in the manga next chapter, because it's going to show not just growth in Uraraka, but it will most likely lead to Uraraka finally telling Deku not that she loves him, but that she is going to be a hero that helps the heroes. How she's going to be someone who is going to help and support Deku as a hero, because she realizes that most likely he can't do it on his own. So if anything, it's going to be a characterization of Deku showing that he does need people to help him, but also be characterization for Uraraka showing that her goals went from solely wanting money to truly being what a hero should be, and eventually lead both her, Deku, and everyone else in Class 2A down the path to be true heroes and on the right path to stopping All For One. And remember, All For One told Deku that if he continues down this path, that it's going to wear and tear on his heart. But it won't be able to do that effectively if he has other people supporting him and pushing him forward and protecting him when he is down, and him protecting them when they fall. So if anything, All For One is going to be proven wrong because he didn't factor in the power of friendship, more or less, which makes sense. No villains ever really factor in the power of friendship. So yeah, that's kind of what I think I want for Uraraka in the next chapter, or at least when she comes back in contact with Deku, but also that can be applied to pretty much all of the characters in Class 2A, specifically Froppy, Ida. Most likely Ida is going to also have a confrontation with Deku. Sholto is most likely going to have a form of confrontation with Deku, and showing how they're going to be supporting him moving forward, and through all of Class 2A basically telling Deku that they're going to support him. This would be the moment leading to Deku to finally opening up his heart and letting them all in and letting them help him in his time of need. And that is going to be something that the vestiges inside of One For All are going to be reflecting on a little bit more, and they were most likely going to approve of this and support Deku in this choice. So most likely what we're going to be seeing next chapter, hopefully that's coming out in the next few weeks, is seeing Class 2A as well as Bakugo trying to convince Deku that he needs their help and that they are willing to help him no matter what, because frankly they all know that Deku has One For All. So the more people that Deku can trust to help fight All For One, the better chance that he has of actually achieving his goal of saving Shigaraki, as well as being able to get back to the point where he can hang out with his friends, go back to that moment where he can just be happy with them now. So yeah, that's all I really have to say about this chapter. I'm probably going to make another video about Dictator, and particularly in his relationship and how his quirk works with another particular individual, potentially in Class 1A, in Class 2A, and how they may also be there to help Deku as well. So that's going to be a video for another time, but hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully you liked this chapter. If you did, leave a like on this video, leave a comment down below on what do you think of the Bakugo is the second user theory. Do you agree with it? Do you disagree with it? Leave your thoughts down in the comments down below, as well as hit that notification bell to be notified for whenever I upload more content like this, as well as subscribe to my YouTube channel. So do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye! I'm sorry, I had to do that.